and one of co-chairs for the Regional Impact Council, and as part of All Home. And I also work at Larkin Street Youth Services in San Francisco. Really great to see everybody. We are so excited to have all of you come back, our esteemed and super helpful steering committee, to help us continue to think through this important work we're doing across the region to address housing, homelessness, and the needs of folks that are extremely low income. So we are ecstatic, as I said, to see you and welcome all of you here today to spend the next hour and a half for us to get a lot of great information from you and share a lot of great information with you. So with that, I will turn it over to Odin.
Thanks so much, Sherilyn, and welcome everyone. Nice to see you. And I'm excited about our meeting today and about the work that you are all engaged in and what we're doing. I also did want to lift up something that's on all of our minds, which is the terrible, horrific violence in Texas yesterday. It probably doesn't need to be mentioned, but I feel like I can't start any meetings today without mentioning it. And that's all I'll say, but I just want us to hold some space for that and realize that we're doing work that is tied to the same system that has created these ongoing challenges and violent outbursts that we're facing. So with that being said, and please feel free to share a comment in the chat, and I'm looking forward to engaging today. What we're going to do is turn the corner into really talking about the big moves in a specific sense. Last month, we celebrated a year anniversary of the launch of the RAP, and that's really exciting. We're continuing to move forward, deepening implementation there, strengthening our collective ability to move forward with the 1-2-4 framework. And the big moves are really an incredible complement to that. So we wanted to take some more time with all of you today to explore two of those. And we're gonna move through just some introductions and framing, and then we're gonna dive into each of those, which Susanna will present. So first I wanted to turn it over to Ken for a little reflection on where we've been, what happened since last month's meeting, and some framing on where we're going today.
Thanks, Odin. And I believe we have a few slides. Or not. Here they come. Last month, we introduced the support card. This is a framework outlining 4 core elements: leadership, accountability, resources, and transparency that have been identified as necessary to implement the RAP at the jurisdictional level. We've been spending a lot of time talking with many of you, with technical committee members, with the people who serve on our people with lived experiences, committees, and other folks around the region. And we're developing this as really a tool for you, for the region, for its jurisdictions, as a way of really looking at what it'll take to achieve the RAP 75% reduction goal. The intention is to create a tool that can be used to monitor goals related to homelessness prevention, interim supportive housing, permanent housing solutions, not only to implement the RAP, but really to implement local plans as well. And with the point in time counts in our rearview mirror very recently, we think this can really be a tool that is a positive tool for jurisdictions, not a gotcha, hence the word support, and that it can be used to leverage other reports as well, such as the HAP plans and local plans, so we don't duplicate efforts. One of the things we heard is that it's really important to get agreement and support relative to accountability and transparency. What do we mean when we say that? We want to capture the city-county partnerships that are needed. We want to include the voices of people with lived experience. And we want to ensure that the tool is a force for positive change, something that the staff, the elected leadership, the nonprofit leadership and staff and so forth that are really working across the region to make the RAP 75% reduction goal a reality, that this can be a tool to get there. We're incorporating feedback that we've received, and we're going to be bringing it back to you at some point in the relatively near term to take another look and to start using it at the jurisdictional level. Next slide, please. So based upon input from the RIC, and as I said, from other conversations we've been having across the region, we're taking a deeper dive, essentially a deeper look at how do we achieve the 1-2-4 framework? How do we create system flow that advances interim supportive housing, permanent housing solutions, and homelessness prevention simultaneously? And so we're pulling together a group of experts, many of them from the RIC Technical Committee, to look at developing principles to identify what's working across the region related to the 3 framework dynamics. And we're going to be first looking at interim supportive housing. And we expect to both create a set of solutions, set of best practices that can be used by local jurisdictions, but also bring back a set of principles for what really good interim supportive housing looks like in this region, so that we can have that as a tool for the region to use and the jurisdictions in the region to use as we move forward. And then we'll subsequently be doing it for permanent supportive housing and homelessness prevention as well, as we need to move forward on all 3, not just one, as you know. We have kicked off implementation with Solano County, where they have convened a group of folks to actually move on RAP goals, which is fantastic. We are reconvening with Contra Costa County and jumpstarting our efforts there. And we're working to build partnerships in San Mateo County, which also adopted or endorsed rather the regional action plan. Also, finally, stay tuned for the Solutions Library, which will be launched soon. And as I said, with the point in time count numbers behind us, we think that makes it even more clear that we need to work on these upstream issues, which we're going to be talking about today, a lot in June, a lot in July, and then again in September, to address the root causes of homelessness. If we can achieve, or when we do achieve, the 75% reduction in homelessness, unsheltered homelessness, that is the RAP goal, we want it to hold. In fact, we want to be able to build upon it. And we're not going to be able to do that if we don't address these upstream issues. So with that, we'll get to that part of the agenda, and I will turn it over to Tamika. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see you all. Just building on what Ken was just saying in terms of the sort of collective work that we're doing together, the RAP plan was really sort of step 1. We have an urgent need to bring our brothers and sisters indoors and be transitioning them toward permanent housing and stability. But we also know, as Ken was referring to, unless we deal with not only the upstream issues, but frankly, the structural barriers that exist that make homelessness so challenging in our region, then we're really missing the bigger picture. And as always, All Home really imagined that we would do both of these things, that we would have long-term solutions that complemented our really short-term goals of bringing 75% of our neighbors indoors within the next 3 years. So that's what we're going to do today. Next slide, please. And, I know that everybody on this call has a day job. And so we not only appreciate your time that you spend with us trying to co-create these ideas, we really are going to be putting the pedal to the metal in the next few months, where we're bringing ideas to you all, wanting your input and feedback, really wanting to vet these ideas. And we're doing that within the principles that the RIC has set up from the beginning, which are shown here. We really want to make sure that all of the big moves that we're moving forward are intended to serve and support the people most impacted by homelessness and housing insecurity. So that is why people are at the center of our work. That is why we are so intentional about including all of those voices into the construction of this strategy, and really want to make sure that we maintain that focus as we deliver these big moves. And of course, around those are, the impact, the feasibility, and how in fact we are moving the needle on these big moves. So that's the intention of what we're trying to do today. We're not coming up with a new plan. It's an expansion of understanding the structural barriers that need to be removed in order for us to have the most significant impact that we can, hence our big moves agenda. Next slide, please. So the All Home staff and our co-chairs have really been vetting these big moves that you're going to hear about today and voting on around these three criteria. Does the big move have a significant enough impact on the number of people who are economically and socially challenged in our region? Not just those who are on the streets today, but those who are most at risk of homelessness. Racial equity is at the center of our work collectively, but it also needs to be at the center of these big moves. Are we actually going to be able to see a reduction in the racial disparities that exist? So that is one of the criteria that we're going to be asking you to evaluate as you rank the direction of these big moves. Are they consistent with addressing racial equity from your perspective? And then lastly, feasibility. Is it really a big move? That term, I think, can be interpreted in different ways, but big to us is scale of impact, but it also is, does it get to the barrier that has blocked prosperity for extremely low income households in the region? And can we actually make progress on it over the next 3 to 5 years? So that's how we have been thinking about these big moves, and hope that gives you all some context for how you would evaluate the ones that you'll see. And I guess just to build a little bit on what Ken was saying about the point in time count, we for the first time organized as a region to shift the narrative about the incredible work that is happening in communities all throughout the region to combat homelessness. And I think we were successful. The headlines, at least that I was a part of, and the interviews that I conducted really got through that it could have been so much worse if we had not organized as a regional impact council, but also all the incredible work that you all are doing in your own communities. We staved off a catastrophic increase in homelessness. And I just want to acknowledge that and take a moment of celebration, because we have so much more work to do. But I think recognizing that it could have been worse, and the strategies that are in sort of employed in the region right now made it better. So we just have to do more of that, and we have to make it bigger and scale. So with that context and framing, I'd love to pass it to Susanna, who at this point is going to walk you all through the big moves, and then we'll continue that discussion for the remainder of our time together. Susanna?
Thanks, Tamika. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you. And I'm really excited that after a number of months of workshopping and discussions with this group, with the technical committee, the working group, and our Community Partners Council, we're at a stage, like Tamika mentioned, where we're ready to bring potential big moves to you all for your discussion and for your review. We're, again, going to talk about 2 potential big moves in more detail today. But before we do that, I'm going to spend just a minute reviewing our process, how we got to this point. And so on this slide, you can see our work, again, like was mentioned, has been organized around the gap that exists between housing costs and income for people with extremely low incomes in the Bay Area. The big moves have been focused into 4 broad buckets, focused around housing supply, affordable housing supply, direct subsidy, around safety net, and around employment. Next slide, please. And our first batch of draft big moves, you may remember, there were 6 ideas and we brought them to you all at the beginning of this year. We workshopped them in small groups. We heard a bunch of feedback from you all. We added a bunch more ideas based on that feedback. We workshopped further with the working group. And this month we took that list back to the technical committee for their feedback and review. And so what we're bringing to you over the next several months is a list of potential big moves for discussion, feedback, and ultimately for your endorsement. And so these are ideas that seemed poised for the greatest impact. Next slide, please. And this is our list. I'm going to briefly describe each of them. And again, we'll discuss 2 in greater detail today. On the housing side, we're looking at potentially 5 big moves. The first is to establish an ELI carve-out in future funding measures at the state, regional, and local levels, very much built on the experience of Measure A in Santa Clara County. The second potential big move is establishing a permanent source of funding for operations and services. The third big move is making the home key CEQA exemption permanent. The fourth big move is creating a statewide rental assistance program delivered as a refundable tax credit. And then the last draft big move is creating a permanent Medi-Cal benefit for supportive services like tenancy supports, very much accelerating and building on the progress in CalAIM. On the income side, we also have 5 draft big moves at this point. The first is related to the California Statewide Automated Welfare System, or CalSAWS. The state is in the process of bringing its disparate public benefit platforms under one umbrella, and that'll be implemented at the county level over the next year or so. It provides a really exciting opportunity to advance changes that would increase access to public benefits for folks across the state and for upwards of 200,000 households in the Bay Area alone. The second potential draft big move is to evolve the California Earned Income Tax Credit into a guaranteed income. The third big move on this side is instituting a series of reforms to eliminate the benefits cliffs, which today keep extremely low income residents and others trapped in poverty. The fourth potential big move is a regional campaign related to increasing capacity and wages for the homeless services workforce. And then the last big move here on this list is creating a Bay Area RISE, which would be a reimagined regional workforce development system that's designed to serve folks with barriers to employment, those who are exiting homelessness. And then down here at the bottom of the slide is a big move that arguably underpins everything else. And that is developing a regional Hearts and Minds campaign. This is our attempt to really operationalize the conversations we've had with this group and with many others about the need to shift mental models. And it's designed to be complementary to some of the really excellent work that's happening in the region and across the state, and something we imagine would include people with lived experience and empowering them in their advocacy work and in their work as community leaders. Before I move into the 2 ideas that we'll be talking about today, I'm happy to pause and answer any clarifying questions about our process, how we got to this moment, and any clarifying questions about the list that I just walked through. Great. Okay, well, with that,
I had a quick question. Can you share more about how the renter tax credit would work, how it would be funded? Just a little more. Do we have more of a sense of that?
Yeah, we'll actually be talking about that in detail in about 20 minutes. But I shared a memo ahead of time where thinking about a number of different funding mechanisms, and I'm happy to go into detail in just a minute. Okay, Nahima, if you don't mind resharing the slides, I think we can soldier on. Thanks. Okay, so what we're discussing today are two potential big moves on the housing side. The first one we'll be talking about is making the statutory CEQA exemption that exists in HomeKey permanent. And so, like I just mentioned, we sent ahead of time a couple of memos that detail some of the things that we've been exploring related to each of these ideas. And so what I thought that I would do today is try to highlight some of the important elements of those memos as a way to frame up a discussion with you all about each of these ideas. So let's, I think, start with the first one. Nahima, on the next slide, there's just a little bit of information here pulled out. Yeah, thank you. So on the HomeKey CEQA exemption, just to provide a little bit of background on how we got to this point, in conversations that we've had on HomeKey, the statutory CEQA exemption established for projects funded by that program has emerged as one of the most important elements of Project HomeKey. And the impact of that exemption, in addition to the other regulatory streamlining provisions, was also identified in the Turner Center's recent report as critical to its success. The CEQA exemption is set to expire in 2024. And so this proposal would make it permanent for the types of housing that are currently funded by Project HomeKey. So housing for individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. In the memo, there's a little bit more detail specifically about the statutory language and an AB 140 that houses the statutory CEQA exemption right now. This proposal would lift the language that currently exists in the statute related to Project HomeKey that delineates the types of housing that are funded by that program, put that language into AB 140 and remove the sunset date. And in doing so, create a permanent CEQA exemption for those housing types that are funded by Project HomeKey today. Just a couple of notes that we wanted to elevate in terms of the criteria that Tamika mentioned we've been thinking about. On impact, I think as many of you know, Project HomeKey in the first round created 6,000 new units of housing and housed an estimated 8,000 people in roughly 1 year. And the analysis suggests that 40% of those units came online in under 6 months. And so there's a sense that a permanent CEQA exemption could further that success, providing housing at the scale and the speed needed. From a racial justice perspective, people of color, as we know, are overrepresented in the population of people experiencing homelessness, particularly Indigenous and Black residents. A permanent effort to quickly produce housing at scale, supported by a statutory CEQA exemption, has enormous implications for addressing racial disparities in homelessness. People of color are also disproportionately at risk of homelessness, being more likely than their white counterparts to be renters and to be cost burdened and housing insecure. On feasibility, just a couple of notes. This proposal makes permanent the CEQA exemption that has already been negotiated as part of developing Project HomeKey. And so we see this as low-hanging fruit. And the governor's office is interested in this big move and is supportive of helping to find a legislative sponsor for the next session. The last thing that I'll mention here before I turn it back over to Odin is a consideration related to some of the other big moves that you saw on that list a moment ago. It's clear that this big move is reliant on several others in order to be successful and to have the kind of impact that we're imagining, particularly the permanent source of operations and funding. And so just to make the point that we see a number of these big moves as mutually reinforcing and in fact really reliant on each other in order to have the aggregate impact that we're trying to have with this work. So I wanted to make sure that that was elevated. I'm going to pause and I think hand it back to Odin to facilitate some questions and some discussion about this.
Great. Thanks, Susanna. So, as we talked about before, a lot of additional information here, a deeper dive on this big move and others, and wanted to see if there were clarifying questions around this, ideas that this is sparking for folks. Just interested in seeing sort of what's coming up for people as you hear Susanna talking about this and think about this as a draft big move. Kevin, please.
Thanks. I didn't quite follow in the memo and in this as well, whether or not the current exemption and whether or not we're trying to expand it or broaden it. Is it that this only applies to the funding source, i.e. HomeKey, or the type of development, i.e. a hotel conversion versus new development, or is it the characteristics of the population being served so that any project, so I would imagine it would be the broadest way to try to move this forward, that inclusive of Project HomeKey, inclusive of new development or hotel redevelopment, as long as it's serving the population that HomeKey that's the policy. So could you clarify, which of these things does it currently cover and what we're hoping to do with the big move?
Yeah, I'm happy to. This proposal relates to both people experiencing homelessness and those at risk of homelessness, which is the language that exists in the statute that created Project HomeKey. And it also relates to the types of housing that Project HomeKey, that the CEQA exemption was created for. So it is very much tied to what was negotiated and developed for Project HomeKey. That means that these are acquisitions, master leases. I think the detail is either in the memo or linked about the types of projects that Project HomeKey was created to fund. This big move proposes making the CEQA exemption that was created for those types of housing permanent. Does that help?
But it would still have to be with a project that received funding from Future HomeKey, or it decouples that and it focuses on the type of development and the population served. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. It decouples it. So by lifting that language out of the statute that created Project HomeKey, the program, and putting it into the bill that created the statutory CEQA exemption, we're creating a permanent statutory CEQA exemption for that type of housing, decoupled from Project HomeKey.
Thanks, Susanna. Daryl, I'm going to come to you, but there's a question in the chat from Mayor Schaaf. Susanna, I don't know if you're seeing that, just the relationship between this and AB 2011.
I wonder if Ken or Tamika would want to speak to that, who are kind of closer to those negotiations.
Thanks, Suzanne. I was actually, Amy, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, Daryl, thank you for waiting, AB 2011 and how this is different.
Yeah, thanks. I'd be happy to. And it actually ties to a concern that I have around this, because I think this is absolutely critical and important, but looking at the details are going to matter. From what I understand from a lot of NPH members that have done Project HomeKey projects, a number of them, they have not done the CEQA exemption because of the skilled and trained labor requirement added on to the project that would have made it infeasible. And so AB 2011, what it does is it tries to establish a different labor standard that is more amenable to affordable housing and homeless projects, unlike where the skilled and trained standard came from, which is much more large infrastructure, petrochemical type projects, where it's not a feasible standard, and it hasn't ever been used before in affordable housing. And I don't think that there have been home key projects that have used it, although I could be wrong, but that this is just my, and we could go back to the Turner Center to see what they've learned. AB 2011, Assembly Member Wicks, the chair of the Assembly Housing Committee, and it just passed off the Assembly floor yesterday with I think 48 to 11 vote, so really strong support, establishes a labor standard that's based on prevailing wages, healthcare benefits, and apprenticeship utilization. So it's about expanding the workforce and establishing a strong labor package that's going to be pro-affordable housing and pro-labor, make sure that we're building the workforce, that workers get what they need, and it does not prevent affordable housing projects from being developed. So I love Mayor Schaaf's question, and I would encourage the group to consider maybe if we could take the labor standard from AB 2011 and integrate it into this new effort.
Thank you, Amy, for that. And Daryl, please go ahead. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, Amy, because my question was centered on labor. But the other question I had is there an advantage of bifurcating type and target population as opposed to just leaning into target population? So basically any project that targets unsheltered folks for any type of housing, right? Is there a reason why we're trying to build in type and target population?
Well, Suzanne, I don't know if you were going to take a stab at this, but I think our rationale was trying, when assessing sort of feasibility, trying to work within the context that was already approved and sort of wanting, and I think what Amy and Mayor Schaaf are raising is a question for this committee, right? Is, do we want to integrate, assuming that the new labor standards pass and AB 2011 moves forward, that replaces the elements of the labor negotiation and Project Home Key resolution or not. And so we were trying to not undo too much to continue to make it feasible, but that was the only reason. It wasn't about a choice point of whether one or the other was more important.
That makes sense. Thanks, Tamika.
Any other clarifying questions on this or concerns that folks want to raise at this point? Yeah, Anu, please go ahead. Just unmute, please.
I had to do that today.
We all
My
do.
question builds on what Mayor Schaaf was talking about and Amy was addressing is, are we looking at the slice of CEQA exemption as a first step to broadening CEQA exemption streamlining, or are you just wanting to focus on this because it's a lower hanging fruit?
Yeah, thank you, Anu. I think, again, our attempt to thread the needle of impact and feasibility led us to this particular big move. I think we're really curious to hear again from the committee how this might be expanded, if that feels like the right direction, or how it could be supportive or amplify some of the other efforts that we know are going on. But again, our thinking was trying to thread the needle of working within a negotiation that has already been successful and how to make that permanent for its purposes.
I think one thing to think about, Anu, is, and others, this is the first stab at this, and we want to work with you all to create this. We're approaching it exactly as Susanna and Tamika have described. I think it's also important to think about some of the other big moves that Susanna touched on earlier, such as a carve out for ELI housing, which is something we're working on right now. But if that were to advance, for example, and had a carve out for extremely low income housing at the state level, a source of funds, something that's been a dream of many housers for a long time, that's regular and ongoing. If there were a regional measure, if it was applied to local measures, that would be a really big game changer, particularly if it was linked to some types of reforms and efficiencies which were embedded in HomeKey. That would arguably be a big move. So there's a lot of different pieces here to keep in mind as we move forward.
Amy?
I think this is great. Oh, am I? Okay. I think this is great. And because we kind of get back to Darielle's question, in some ways with CEQA and streamlining, we have to chip pieces off and chip pieces off and chip pieces off to be able to have some impact here. I would really encourage not to go out with maybe to swap the AB 2011 language for the labor requirements that are in there now, or at least to do the research with Turner Center about how many Project HomeKey projects actually use skilled and trained, because again, my information might be wrong, but what I understood is that they did not use the CEQA exemption. So we would want to make sure that this big move actually had the impact that we intend. So we want to make sure that every component of it actually doesn't create a new barrier. And that's why 2011 came about, was to take away the current barrier that exists around skilled and trained as a labor standard, and to replace it with one that is a comprehensive labor package. And that, that it passed the first hurdle of the assembly floor is a good sign, but it has a long way to go. So we will need a lot of help getting that over the finish line now on the Senate side.
Great, thank you, Amy. And it sounded like somebody was trying, maybe somebody on the phone was trying to ask a question.
Yeah. Hi, this is
Go ahead,
Matt Franklin
please.
from Mid-Penn Housing. There's one other aspect of this, and it might be something just to be aware of as a choice point down the road. I do really like this thinking of big moves, and I think it's really smart to look at things like HomeKey and figure out how to kind of tear off of it from a precedent perspective. To the extent that this could become an exemption that's powerful for the ELI population in a number of settings, one being integrated in a HomeKey type environment where it's formerly homeless or chronically homeless with those at risk, but another being, integrated more broadly in an affordable housing development. And in a world where there's 1 million or so ELI folks in the Bay Area, versus the 35,000 or so chronically homeless down the road, it'd be helpful to think about a minimum percentage of ELI eligibility. So to broaden the eligibility to say an affordable housing development that had at least 30% ELI units, for instance. Because once you get out of that kind of HomeKey type structure, there's somewhere in that 30 to 40% ELI range is about as aggressive as you can balance it financially. Number one, and then number two, of course, there's a lot of policy debate and discussion around kind of the benefits of that integrated community. So if this got legs and became a really powerful tool beyond kind of our image of the HomeKey population configuration, the next step I would see, and I think it'd be a wonderful, really powerful tool, but you'd want to define it as some minimum within a broader community, in my view.
Great, thanks, Matt. Tamika.
Yeah, that's great, Matt. That's exactly what we were thinking with respect to how these big moves link together. So we'd love to kind of pick your brain around that and the ELI carve out idea that we're having. I also wondered, and this may be for you, Matt or Amy or Josh, about the interaction of something like this with SB 35 and how those pieces would relate to each other and how we should be thinking about that. Because we also know that you get extra points in the tax credit applications for, certain focus on ELI. So just giving us a little bit of context around how those things interact with each other would also be helpful as we explore this big move.
I'm glad to have a conversation about that offline.
Thanks,
There's a
Jeff.
lot of discussion about an extension of SB 35, and earlier this year, there was some interest by Senator Wiener in doing an extension, and then held off in part because of a lot of the discussion around labor standard. So I think this conversation is right on time with thinking about what might be possible as conversations are moving forward in Sacramento, and the urgency of weighing in with our Bay Area delegation to make sure they know what our perspective is on that. I think that's great. And I wonder for Josh or Matt or any other of the nonprofit developers on the call that know about the HomeKey projects, if you know what your experiences, did you use the CEQA exemption or not? Just to test with the small sample size here, or others that are on the call.
So, you know, Amy, the one we did didn't require much work. And so I think we fell under the minimum work. It was a suites hotel that is in very good shape, and it's going to be sustainable physically for quite a while. So I believe we did, but I can confirm that, use it. But it kind of wasn't as relevant because we're in kind of the minority of the projects. I think that many of those are going to need very substantial capital work down the road.
Yeah, we're working through it now with SB 35, and you might want to look at how it relates to SB 330. There's a whole other conversation.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Katie, I see your hand, please.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't find my virtual hand. Just a couple of thoughts. We did use the HomeKey. We did use the CEQA exemption, at least on one of our projects. Though it probably would have, I'm sure it would have qualified for a neg deck. I think one of the most important aspects of the CEQA exemption has been how it just shrinks the amount of time, not just cost around analysis, but the amount of time it takes, and the public process piece, frankly, and that time. And I guess what I'm thinking about it, I think it would be just a huge win to be able to extend any length of time this exemption around this kind of project, even if we didn't expand on what it might go to. I think the most important thing is to get a win with regards to keeping the CEQA exemption alive at any level, and build on that. And I'm thinking about if the ask is too big and it gets shut down out of a knee-jerk reaction, as a lot of people feel an erosion of CEQA, and there's more public pressure, that would be a big loss. So I think it's important to be strategic. And in the near term, the most important thing is to actually have that extension of the ability to have the CEQA exemption, even if it's not as broad as we might like at this point. We just don't want to lose it. I think it just, in terms of the near term turnaround conversion of existing properties, I mean, it's just a game changer. And if we're trying to move things fastly, those are the properties that we need to be focused on.
Great. Thank you, Katie. If there's not anything else that is like a burning, clarifying question or concern, I'm going to move us to our gradients of agreement vote on this. But let me just see if there's anything else that people are sitting with that's, making you feel a little off, or you just are unclear on something here. Okay. So we're going to move to a gradients of agreement vote. What that is, just as a reminder, and if you already know this, I apologize for reviewing it again. It's like being on an airline and hearing all the safety announcements, is if you vote a 1, that means that you strongly support this. And if you're a 2, you agree with reservations. So all these pieces are on this slide now. 3 is you're neutral on it. It's okay, but not thrilled either way. 4, you disagree, but you won't actually block this from moving forward as a big move that we continue. There are lots of great points that were brought up here, and we need to continue to explore those. But including all of those explorations, what you're saying, if you vote with 4, is, I'm not going to hold up the group even if I have some reservations. And then 5 is that you strongly disagree. I don't agree with this, and I can't support it. So this is not a straight vote. This is a consensus building tool. And what this will mean is that you feel like, with the criteria that Tamika shared earlier and reviewed, that this is genuinely a big move that we should continue exploring. This has the impact at scale we want to see. This has the potential to center and prioritize racial equity, and this is feasible. This is something that we can do, and that really meets the need that exists. Any questions about the process here, or what the gradients of agreement are? Or I'll have Nahima pull up our fun Zoom poll on this. Yep, exactly. Tamika, thanks for the clarification. We're just saying, like, you're on the right track. I'm feeling like, it's good, with all of the discussion that we had around it. So let's pull out our fun Zoom poll here and get rolling, and then we'll share results once it's done, and have a little bit of discussion before we take a stretch prior to draft Big Move 2. Remember, 1 is you're agreeing more with it. You think it's a great idea to continue exploring. 4 is that you have reservations, but you're not going to hold this back. 5 is no way. Let's do another. So I think what we typically do here is that all home staff are not voting. Yeah, Darren, good question. Folks, if you're purely on the phone, you can if you don't mind being outed, you can, I don't know how we do that, actually, if you're on the phone, because I'm looking at it, I can't vote for people.
We might need to just have them come off mute and offer
their perspective, right? If
they want to be incognito
open
and
ballot.
teach us, they could do that as well.
Exactly. Yeah, Darren, good question, because we have several people who are on the phone. Okay, so right now,
I'd be happy to get that started if it's helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
This is Matt. I'm like in that 1-2 range. I mean, I really think there's something here. I think it's really cool and good thinking, and some, just some things to talk through and work through here.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else on the phone want to offer a perspective on this before we formally close the poll? All right. So if you're not like Matt, but on the phone and not at the 1-2 range, but you're more in like the 4 range, and you don't feel like, bringing down the party here, we still want to hear from you. So if it's not now, we want you to reach out to Ken or to Susanna and say, hey, I got some real concerns about this, because we want this group to be pretty well aligned, not necessarily in lockstep, but we need alignment from all of you to be able to move this forward and then be working together on this if this does wind up being a big move. So right now, if we end the poll, folks can see the results. Most folks, like upwards of over 80% of us, are in the 1-2 category. And then Matt's just sort of a vocal vote and not even in there. So that drives it up to, 15 of us on this call. And then there are a couple of folks who are just abstaining. Maybe they need more information. And then one person is like, I have some reservations, but I'm not going to hold up the group. Before we just do a little bit of a stretch break and pivot into the next draft big move, any reflections on that? And if you want to be daring, if you're that one person who put down a 4 and you want to share what your concerns are in this group, that would be wonderful. We want to encourage transparency. That is one of our, one of the pieces of the support card framework after all. But if you do not, I still want to encourage that person who is the 4 vote on here to reach out and chat more with Ken or Susanna or Tamika if you can track her down. So any thoughts on this? Whether you wherever you voted, if there's any kind of feedback or thinking or anything else, and then we'll be sure to do next steps before we wrap up this call at 3:30. Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you very much. That was really, I feel like, Susanna, as always, like awesome information, well presented, a great discussion, and everybody engaging. And then this gives us a pretty good sort of compass reading on, we're heading in the right direction, and we're going to continue to. It's not a straight line. It's more like sailing. So for right now, before we go into the second big move, because it gave you a lot of information, and then we went through this whole process, just want to encourage folks, kind of whatever you do when you're on a Zoom call, to stretch. It might be, and I have no shame of kind of stretching on screen, but if you want to turn your screen off, that's fine. Stand up from your desk if that's something that's available to you, or just if you're at your desk, I want to invite you to do a little whatever version of airplane yoga that you enjoy. Maybe if you don't have any neck issues, just a gentle ear to shoulder on each side. Maybe shoulder rolls is really nice. You can also just get the energy going. Take your hands off your keyboard if they've been there. I won't out anybody for catching up on email. And just take a few deep breaths. And one thing I do want to encourage, and I want to invite you to do this practice all the time, is look away from your screen. I think I've mentioned this on previous calls. I have a 20-20-20 rule, which is every 20 minutes, you should look away from your screen at something 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds to give your eyes a break. So want to encourage you to do that. Perhaps you've been doing it, or if you've been catching up on email, just take a break for a second and do that. A few more deep breaths, whatever you need to do. I know everybody who's not on video is just having their own big moves dance party right now, but come on back to the group. We have another 35 minutes. We want to take that time to review the second draft big move that we want to present to you today. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll have open conversation. We'll do the gradients of agreement vote, see where we are, and then we'll have a few minutes, hopefully in about a half hour, to wrap things up and talk about where we go from here. So Susanna, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Odin. Okay, moving into the second draft big move we have for you today. We've got, thanks Nahima, similarly, just a bit of a description here on the slide, and I'm going to do the same thing, provide a little bit of background on this idea before we open it up for clarifying questions and discussion. So the bit of background on this draft big move, as many of you know, the majority of ELI renters are renting on the private market without assistance. And the majority of ELI renters in the Bay Area are severely cost burdened, paying an average of 76% of their income on rent each month. So the need for additional rental assistance is well known. It's been a part of the discussions that we've been having here in this group and with others since last fall. In early conversations with the RIC, we talked about the possibility of creating a state version of the voucher program. So providing vouchers at the state level, intending to supplement what is very much a need that is not filled at the federal level. You all raised a number of challenges over the course of those conversations, including the challenge of creating a significant new program in the context of the need to balance the state budget each year, and also the challenge of administration of a program like this, and the need for making really effective use of the vouchers that we have. So we heard a lot of that feedback. And what has emerged, I think, from those conversations is the idea of providing rental assistance directly to tenants through the tax code in the form of a refundable credit. The idea of providing rental assistance through a tax credit is not new. In fact, the Turner Center proposed a federal renter's tax credit back in 2016. Gary Painter from USC has been pushing for a renter's tax credit or a rental assistance program delivered as a tax credit. So this idea is very much built on that foundation. A couple of other details I think to lift up from the memo. This type of rental assistance credit would be built off the infrastructure that we already have in the state's tax code and very much related to the renter's tax credit that exists today. But it would be available to ELI renters. Ideally, the credit would be paid monthly, which is much more feasible now than it was 3 years ago, and happy to talk about that in a second. The credit would also be refundable in a way that our current, some of our current tax credits are not, meaning that the cash would flow directly into tenants' pockets. It would be adjusted by income and household size. The benefits of providing rental assistance through a tax credit, one of them is a reduced administrative burden that is inherent in the voucher program we have today. This idea also removes the landlord discrimination, which is another challenge that exists in the current voucher program. The tax code infrastructure already exists, and we provide cash benefits through the tax code directly to California residents already. It's also a highly flexible and portable way to provide support directly to renters. And so in terms of an investment, Gary Painter's shop estimates that providing a rental assistance through this kind of mechanism directed at extremely low income renters would cost about $10 billion a year. And that would be an average of around $6,000 annually to extremely low income renters. Just as some perspective, the average homeowner received about $4,300 in tax benefits from the mortgage interest tax deduction. So this is somewhat comparable. One thing I did want to lift up for us is the consideration about the renter's tax credit proposal that is currently live and moving through the legislative process today. SB 843, as some of you may know, Senator Glazer's bill, which would expand our current renter's tax credit. Right now, the renter's tax credit is a $60 credit for single filers and a $120 credit for joint filers. SB 843 would expand that credit amount to $500 and $1,000 respectively for single and joint filers. It would also make the renter's tax credit refundable. So getting to that idea of providing money directly to renters. And so SB 843 we feel is an important and critical benefit for renters in the state. But this proposal, this draft big move, is an anti-poverty tool. This is aimed at stabilizing the most vulnerable renters in the state and preventing homelessness at scale. As such, it imagines a deeper level of subsidy and a larger investment. Before I stop, I'll just highlight a couple of other things that from the memo that would be good to lift up. In terms of impact, we're estimating that a tax credit like this would support roughly 250,000 ELI renter households in the Bay Area alone, potentially up to 1.1 ELI renter households statewide. On on racial equity. Again, as we know, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are disproportionately represented in the population of people with extremely low incomes in the Bay Area, and they are disproportionately renters. And so more than a quarter of Black individuals in the Bay Area live in an ELI household, compared to just 9% of white individuals. People of color are also disproportionately rent burdened, as we know. 46% of all renters in the Bay Area are cost burdened. That figure jumps to 60% for Black renters in particular. So we feel like a rental assistance program dedicated to extremely low income renters could have a significant impact on some of the racial disparities we see in housing insecurity. Last note on feasibility. This proposal is absolutely ambitious. There are a couple of things I think to note. One, sending cash monthly, so providing this tax credit as a monthly benefit, is an administrative challenge that would need to be solved. It is something that the Franchise Tax Board is actively pursuing. They are looking to understand the feasibility of providing existing tax credits on a monthly basis. It's also, again, as I mentioned, something that is much more feasible today than it was before the pandemic. And some of the other considerations about access to tax code benefits, it can be really difficult to reach populations who don't file with some of our tax code benefits. And so that's certainly a consideration as well. One thing just to note is that, again, we have made much more progress on increasing access to the tax code and tax code related benefits over the last 3 years, related to the economic impact payments and some of those other direct payments that were sent to Americans during the pandemic. So wanted to lift up some of those feasibility considerations. And then finally, this big move, again, like the one we just discussed, is absolutely reliant on the success of others. And in particular, I just wanted to highlight the importance of a commensurate increase in supply. Considering giving this type of rental support to extremely low income renters requires that we be building and increasing supply in order to ensure that those benefits go directly to tenants and don't have an impact on housing prices further. With that, I'm gonna pause and turn it back to Odin for clarifying questions and some discussion.
Thanks, Susanna. So there are already a couple of comments in the chat. One from Jennifer Martinez, and then Vice Mayor Reddy kind of seconded that, and also was wondering about feasibility when the budget surplus is smaller. I don't know if anybody wants to take that on before we open it up for broader discussion, but any responses there to Jennifer's question and maybe the budget question?
Sure, I can jump in. Yes, this benefit is intended to include undocumented immigrants, formerly incarcerated folks, and people with legal challenges. And in terms of the budget surplus, one thing we were thinking about was framing this idea as a pilot and using budget surplus dollars over a series of years, particularly if this was framed as a means to end homelessness, to build support with the governor's office as part of their efforts to increase supply. So could be framed as a pilot program. That might be one way to think about how to utilize surplus dollars in that way.
Great. Thanks, Susanna. Other questions that folks have, and I want to welcome, so Daryl just put a comment in the chat that we can absolutely register as a concern, and also if anybody wants to address. Amy just put a question in the chat as well. And I also want to invite any of our elected officials who are present, if they want to weigh in on this, just share perspective. you'd be most welcome. So I know Mayor Schaaf and Mayor Arreguín are here, Vice Mayor Reddy, representatives from supervisors' offices, Jill or Nathan. I'm trying to scan for other folks. Teresa. Feel free to weigh in. And of course, the floor is open for anybody. Do we want to Amy's question or addressing Dariel's concern? Anybody? Oh, great. Go ahead, Mayor Schaaf.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, this sounds great. Here is one of my political concerns. To me, just on first blush, this might not be as powerful or effective as a guaranteed income. And my concern is the amount of political will that pushing a guaranteed income will entail. And I think doing it through the EITC is the right move structurally. But I'm a little worried that people will say, oh, well, if we're expanding the renter tax credit, we don't need to do a guaranteed income. So that's just a practical question. And I do know Nancy Skinner is looking at ways to do an EITC that gets paid preferably monthly, but at least quarterly. I think she's looking at how it might be loaded onto SNAP cards. Like, so people are trying to figure out the regularity of payment problem. And maybe you all are far more up to date on that than I am. It's been a while since I've checked in on this. But I guess that's my question is, does this potentially hurt the guaranteed income effort? And isn't that, if we had to choose between the two of them, isn't that a more powerful tool?
Thank you for that comment, and definitely echoes what's in the chat, and I think speaks to the feasibility criteria, which we value highly. So other thoughts on that in particular, which seems like a significant area to explore, or are there other questions that are coming up for folks?
Well, maybe I'll respond to
Can I, hey, let me just throw out one other question and you can respond to them both.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you also thought about a tax credit to landlords for reduced rent. And the reason I ask that is there some reason that might help with the fair housing and discrimination piece if people had some sort of incentive? But I'm just asking if you explored that, because that could be coupled with a guaranteed income, whereas this would potentially feel overlapping. And I'll go on mute now. Thanks.
Suzanne, I saw you smiling. Why don't you answer that second question?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mayor Schaaf. We have been looking at the possibility of a tax credit paid to landlords as an incentive. I know Josh Simon, one of our co-chairs in particular, looking at the model that exists in New York City. And so it's actually something we're looking at right now. And I appreciate the thinking around this type of tax credit combined with a guaranteed income, as well as some of the comments along those lines in the chat. So thanks for that.
I mean, dare I say, Mayor and others who, you know, we contemplated whether or not we should do both. And I actually think we should do both. I mean, ELI households benefiting from EITC plus this renter tax credit actually stabilizes households. So we actually saw them sort of interacting in a positive way. But I hear you. I wonder, I mean, we should really explore the feasibility of both of those being complementary, or if one cancels one out. Dariel, I think your point is well taken about who the demographics of the filers. And that's something that the state has actually been working on for quite some time, is to figure out more targeted outreach strategies to get the most impacted households to file for EITC. So that's something that the Economic Security Project us and others have been working on. So we should really take that into consideration as we explore that as the guaranteed income strategy, as well as whether or not we would pursue this renter tax credit idea. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Tamika. Kevin and Amy, I'm just gonna pause you for a moment. I see both of you, but I wanna earn my keep as a facilitator and see if there are other folks who have not spoken up who might like to say something at this point. And then absolutely wanna hear Kevin and Amy, what you have to contribute. Any thoughts? They can go into the chat as well, which is a really nice feature of Zoom. If you have thoughts, folks have been putting stuff there. But you're also welcome to unmute and share a question or a perspective. Okay, hearing none at this point. Kevin, please, and then Amy.
Well, I liked what Tamika said. I'm like, more is more. So like pushing for both is great. I was thinking when I was reading this on two parts. First, there's Assemblymember Santiago has a bill that's getting through the assembly right now, which was the one-time child tax credit of $2,000 for ELI households. I believe it's ELI. I believe it's up to families with incomes up to $30,000. So if it's not exactly ELI, it generally matches. And I think that's just an interesting test case for the like how close we are to getting something politically through that's certainly a lot less than the scale of this, but is in that direction. And it got out of committee last week, and I think they're hoping that it gets to the floor today or tomorrow, and it seems like the votes are there. So I think that's just an interesting like tracking that. And then when it gets to the Senate, it's going to need a lot of help. So if people are tracking bills, AB 2589 is an important anti-poverty bill current. And then the second thing about Daryl's comment in there, the how to actually get it to the 250,000 ELI renter households is really a challenge, but it's a bit of a technical challenge versus like a transformational challenge. So United Way Bay Area's Free Tax Help Coalition, our 100 nonprofits who work together get in a pre-COVID year 70,000 low VLI households filing their taxes. So there's an infrastructure that does exist, and so to get from that 70,000 to more of the 250,000 folks, I think is really just investing and expanding a network that's there. So I think I wouldn't want that to sort of hold people's enthusiasm about sort of moving forward with, could we get this policy in and this major income redistribution anti-poverty measure.
Great, thank you, Kevin. And Amy's question went to the chat and was directed specifically at Tamika, just sort of like the would you rather game. So I don't know if this is a choice, but be interesting, Tamika, if you'd like to respond to that.
So Amy, I feel like the reform we've been pushing on EITC is to actually get that benefit to be monthly and to get it to more households. The amount, love it to be higher, but we haven't necessarily been focused on increasing the EITC tax amount, as opposed to this renter tax credit that is deeply targeted toward ELI households that would make the difference between them being able to stay in their homes and not. So, and frankly, reduce the rent burden from that 80% to something much more manageable. So if I had to choose, I'd say keep the levels of EITC the same, get it to more households targeted, make that benefit monthly, and then increase the renter tax credit to an amount that actually is a rental subsidy that allow, and Sarah Kimberlin's research sort of looks at this as well from the California Budget and Policy Center, where, you know, if households actually have that offset of rent costs, it's a game changer for hundreds of thousands of households. So that would be my answer to that. to that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, challenges, concerns, ideas related to this draft big move? Nathan, please.
Great, thanks. More of a strategic question and kind of policy agnostic on this is that I read that the Rick and All Home would be partners on this, but not the lead. And perhaps I missed it when Susanna was talking, but just thoughts on that of who would be leading on this. And then the second part, you know, the first time I read through this, it kind of triggered the vetoes of the past around, you know, when we were working on a low-income housing tax credit, AB 71 and all of that, where our current governor it has channeled, you know, the governor of the past, where this is a budget, you know, the veto is because it's a budget discussion, right? This is not budget neutral, and so this has to be funded somewhere. And so it can make its way all the way through, you know, the legislature with great leadership, and at the end get kicked back out to a budget discussion for next year. And so I guess the question on that is there movement in the current budget discussions around this, and where's the governor's office? I didn't see this included in either January or May. So just more a strategic question in terms of if we had to choose between where the energy for All Home and the staff have to go, that would be part of the calculus in my mind.
Great, thanks so much. Any other comments, or we're going to go to our gradients of agreement on this big move? All right, so again, when we're doing this gradients of agreement vote, a 1 or a 2 is more agreement, a 3 or a 4 is, a 3 is neutral, a 4 is I disagree, but I'm not going to block it, and a 5 is I can't work with this and don't agree with the direction. And again, the reminder here is that we're going to continue working on this. This is a draft big move, and there'll be a lot more input that you get to have and that others get to have before this is finalized. So support, or where are we on that gradients of agreement? And the folks who are on the phone, actually not seeing any folks on the phone any longer. Let's give this another little bit of time so we can have a discussion and then go into next steps. All right. Well, we have about the same number of percentage of folks voting for this one as for the last. So maybe we'll close the poll, share the results, and have a little discussion. So we're still pretty high here. More people kind of abstaining. Still one person sort of disagreeing but not blocking. And if you don't want to sort of speak up now for our discussion, you're welcome to reach out to Ken or Susanna. And Nahima shared those contact emails in the chat earlier. Maybe Nahima, we can do that again for folks who want to reach out. And, you know, looking like maybe well, actually it's 60% of folks are on the more supportive side. So fewer people voting, but kind of less outright enthusiasm for this. But I think it might be the sort of, EITC question that came up and wanting to work through that. That's just a wild guess, not really knowing much about the content of this. But wanted to see if there's any kind of, after this vote and seeing the results, if anybody has particular observations to share or further questions or ideas regarding this. Right. So essentially, given this directional vote of confidence today, we are going to continue shaping these first two draft big moves. And as Susanna reviewed earlier, there's a whole suite of big moves that we're continuing to explore, and we will bring those to you, and also updates on where these are going in future meetings. Before we wrap up, wanted to see Susanna in particular, but anything else about sort of next steps on the big moves that you'd like to share with folks, or ways people can continue to be tracking this or involved?
Yeah, thanks, Odin. First of all, thank you so much for engaging really thoughtfully on both of these. We got so much fruitful feedback, and we'll be engaging with you one-on-one to move some of these forward. You can expect to see them again, and some of those other ideas that were on that list I shared with you at the top of the meeting in our upcoming meetings over the course of this summer. So expect to see more draft moves in our upcoming meetings. And if you have specific thoughts or concerns that you'd like to share, again, welcome you to reach out to Ken or myself as we're incorporating this feedback and moving things forward.
Great. Thank you, Susanna. And this is just an overview of where we're going with the big moves. You can't exactly click on the screen here for the priorities, but we can send those out as follow-up. And we're also working on housing principles. Yeah, I see your hand, Katie. And the All Home Solutions Library, which has been previewed for you, that Edie is working on. We're going to ask for your ongoing improvements. Any closing thoughts or questions? Katie, I'll go to you and then see if there's anybody else.
Yeah, I just had a question on the medical benefit for supportive services. Was that around case management? What is that specifically looking at? And actually the topic of case management and case managers and how they're so critical, frankly, to helping folks stay housed. And it's one of those positions, frontline positions, always underpaid and difficult to retain. So could you just speak more to that medical benefit and anything else on case management?
Sure, and we'd welcome you to be a part of some of the conversations we're having. Sherilyn, our co-chair, is leading a discussion before too long with some folks who are working with case managers on this idea of a regional campaign to increase capacity and wages. We see both of those ideas as really connected to each other. The Medi-Cal benefit is intended to build on what we have won through Cal-AIM. Cal-AIM is intentionally narrow in scope and short term. A true Medi-Cal funded benefit would be an entitlement. And so we are working with the Corporation for Supportive Housing on this effort. This is something they've been advocating for a long time. I am happy to share some of the things that we have written down so far, if that would be helpful. But again, we see both the funding for that type of tenancy support and housing navigation and supportive services, as well as the capacity and workforce issues as absolutely linked.
Great. Thank you. Any other closing thoughts or next steps that folks want to share? Susanna, I know you've shared a little bit on big moves, but Ken or Tamika, anything else just in closing?
Just I'd just say we're going to be in touch and with some of you on the call who are particularly interested in the ELI housing and CEQA exemption, that whole piece. We're going to be bothering you very soon. So stay tuned.
Yeah, and I just would offer first, thank you for going deep into these big moves. You know, as the governing body for the RIC, we're really going to be leaning on you all, not just for, you know, what goes into the plan, but executing and implementing the plan, using your political will, advocacy, helping us think through blind spots or barriers for these ideas. And so I just want to, you know, reinforce the importance of these discussions for the All Home staff, as well as we see the RIC as the coalition who owns this work. So we are your partners, but it is an equal partnership for us. So thank you for going deep with us today, and we look forward to really digging in this summer to get to the Big Moves platform by the fall.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for being here. Be well, and we look forward to being in touch with you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.